Yeah, it's called Conversations with Jeff, not Screaming Matches.
Yeah, you and I do not agree on Calvinism. But look how nice we are to each other.
I think it's going to really shock a lot of people, thrill a lot of people. A lot of people are going to have to do some soul searching.
It's like, you know what? What are you doing? You're spending all your time trying to destroy another Christian day because you don't understand what's going on, when you should be out there winning people for Jesus.
Right.
Thank you for the job you're doing. Thanks for being willing to address these kind of issues. They're vital to the church.
I feel sorry for what's coming your way, but God bless you, man. It's a good, healthy conversation, and let's keep growing together in the Lord.
People won't change unless they hear the truth, though. And so we need to know the truth, speak the truth. And then the last one I would say is that we need to stay in the truth, no matter what the consequences are.
Okay, everybody, welcome to today's episode of Conversations with Jeff. As you all know, we've been pumping out a bunch of episodes, bunch of conversations, bunch of different guests, that sort of thing. It's been a lot of fun to be, pretty much putting out a new show every day. For those of you guys that tuned in last night, we had our very first episode of Connected, which is a new show that we're putting on here on the GK. And what we're doing with that show is we're having four fellow GK guys. Last night it was myself, Dustin Faulkner, Schumann, and Sam Jones. And we literally just had a free-for-all conversation that you guys actually essentially directed with your questions and comments and suggestions and all that kind of stuff. We went for about an hour and 45 minutes, literally just talked about anything and everything. Started out with a conversation on coronavirus, ended up into a debate over theonomy versus libertarianism. You never know what's going to happen with those kinds of things. So the recording is going into the members-only side of the GK, plugged in. You guys want information on that, go to gatekeepersonline.com/plugged in. If you sign up for the annual membership, you will get a free copy of our book, Social Injustice, that we'll send out to you as soon as you guys get signed up for that. So again, gatekeepersonline.com/plugged in for that information. I'm excited about today's guest. We're bringing on J.D. Rucker. He's the editor-in-chief over at Rucker Report, but also he's the newest addition to the GK Podcast Network with his show, The Rucker Report. And so welcome back to Conversations, J.D. I'm glad we could sit down and chat again.
Thanks for having me again, Jeff. It's good to be here.
Yeah, definitely. And I think and you and I have been having like a lot of conversations, especially with everything that's going on in the news. And what's crazy is I feel like for obviously the last several weeks, all anybody can talk about is coronavirus because it's affecting us so much. And they're having the debate, going on right now. I believe it's still going on. And is it still going on in Congress and stuff? Just still trying to finalize the details and get the vote and all that kind of stuff. It's crazy that it's still like the only thing that's on people's minds right now, even in the news cycle.
Well, I think it's the only thing that can be on their minds right now because it's, like you said, it's affecting all of us. What are we supposed to do? For a lot of us, we have a lot more time on our hands now that this has taken us from out of work, out of our hobbies, out of doing anything that we're used to doing. So why not talk about the cause, or at least the perceived cause? It's on everybody's mind. As far as the bill in Congress, yes, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of they're finalizing this, that, and the other. Should be on the president's desk later today, tomorrow, sometime very soon.
Yeah. It was funny. I think it was about a week and a half ago, and you and I were supposed to grab lunch, and then literally we set plans, and then all of a sudden the governor shuts down the whole state, and we're like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But see, like that's the crazy
odd timing.
Yeah, but see, like that's the crazy thing I feel like of living in somewhere like California that is more liberal is they're kind of coming in with some of the big government solutions, and let's just essentially order a shutdown. Now, from your perspective, was that the right decision,
Yeah.
or how would you have preferred it to have been handled?
So, mandatory shutdowns are a very extreme, kind of last resort. And we're not at the last resort yet. I understand that people are terrified. And I understand that a lot of decisions are made based upon what perhaps the wrong people are doing. Here's the thing. I didn't know anybody who was going out, as far as people that were heading out to going to bars and stuff like that. And those who were, though, were doing so cautiously. When we discussed going to lunch, we were talking about going to Whole Foods or Mother's Market, places where it's not going to be crowded, where it's probably, maybe pick up some groceries, kill two birds with one stone, trying to handle it responsibly. Right now, to put out a blanket, everything's shut down, no business can operate. That's not the right way to go about it, because you have a lot of businesses out there that simply, they can handle this. They have the measures, they have the separation, they have the whatever to continue with business as usual, or business that's slightly adjusted. This type of, okay, so we've got to stop this, so let's cut it off. Newsom was quoted, he was using some study that said that there was going to be 25 million Californians out of 40 million that were going to be infected if he didn't act quickly. These types of scare tactics they're not just overreactions. These are preludes to, in my opinion, just normalization of authoritarianism. You're talking about basically a measure that is getting people used to being controlled, used to being dependent on government. Now, I'm not suggesting that was, some evil machinations of the left, the Democrats, Newsom. They're like, oh, this is our opportunity, but I know it's in the back of their minds. And whenever we lean in that direction, whenever we they say you err on the side of caution. This isn't erring on the side of caution. This is erring on the side of government rules, and we don't. And that's just not how it should be. Should there have been some sorts of measures, minimizing the exposure risks, perhaps age restrictions? I hate to say that, but it's true that there are people that are quite a bit more influenced and put into more danger as a result of the coronavirus than others. Should they have been perhaps given, I don't know, some sort of advanced measures, advanced mandates, or even cautionary tales telling them to stay home or telling them to avoid? Sure. But shutting it down, we're going to end up with a remedy that is far more damaging than the actual ailment itself. We're already seeing this in place. So it's easy to second guess. I hate to be that guy that says, oh, you shouldn't have done this because of this, or things would have been fine. There's no way. For all I know, maybe shutting it down is the only way to prevent it from going out to 25 million people. Maybe his numbers are great. Maybe the doctors are the selective, keep in mind, doctors that they were able to pick out were the right ones. We'll never know, though. And frankly, I trust Americans more than I trust government. That's just in my DNA. I trust that people would have been safer and smarter and make the right decisions generally, and the ones that didn't, yes, they could hurt the rest of us. But this is why we have social media. You saw quote unquote shaming of people doing stupid things during before this mandate. That's still happening. People are still going to do stupid things. Stupid people do stupid things. So throwing out a mandate and making it required for us to stay home, to shelter at home, and all this other stuff, to not go out and do our business, it is overreach, and it's an overreaction. And I think it's going to do a lot more harm than any good it's going to do from preventing however many people from getting the coronavirus.
Yeah, and now, what do you feel like it could be the lasting harm in having this kind of shutdown? Because I feel like on one hand, again, you're having the people that are supporting the shutdown, where they're like, well, hey, we're saving lives, right? And so then what would be the counter argument to that degree, looking at the long lasting effects of pulling off something like this?
So there's really three. Two that are really scary, and one that's absolutely terrifying. You have the obvious one, the economic downturn. People aren't getting paychecks. businesses aren't making money. There's businesses that do rely on the day-to-day, the week-to-week. There's people that rely paycheck to paycheck. And that means that there's going to be people, I don't care how much government you throw at it and say, okay, so we're going to take care of this, we're going to take care of that. There's no blanket solution that's going to make sure that every business doesn't fall apart at no fault of their own, based strictly on, number one, the coronavirus, but more importantly, number two, the shutdowns. So then that will lead to what we're already seeing with these stimulus bills, businesses having to rely on government. That's the second part, and it's a little bit scarier because you're talking about this isn't just okay. So businesses are going to go under. So let's make sure they get these loans. Let's make sure they get some money. Let's keep them secure. Let's do whatever it takes. That's all good and dandy. No, not really, but it's that part is not the horrific part. The horrific part comes with the oversight. It comes with the bureaucracy that's being inserted into literally every single business, big, small, in between. If they participate in this bailout, if they participate in getting these loans, getting this money from government to keep them afloat, then they're going to have government inserted into their businesses. And people say, oh, what's the big deal? They're just trying to make sure that people don't get fired as a result. It's a huge deal because we're talking about months, if not years, of government saying, hey, we gave you guys money and we're seeing that your quotas for diversity are not being properly met, or hey, we noticed that you fired this, that, or the other. This is the equivalent of government-style unions being inserted. I'm not talking about unions where the people themselves are in a labor union. I'm talking about the same type of measures, but being applied from government down to these businesses rather than from unions coming together and taking advantage of the people that are in the unions. But the scariest part, the part that I don't think enough people are talking about right now, is the complacency, the laziness, and perhaps call it the addiction that's going to come from this. When people start to get government assistance, it's hard to get off it. It really is. And we're talking about tens of millions of people who, for many of them, the only money they're going to be receiving in the near future is going to come as either from government or as a direct result of government. Getting on that bandwagon, it's tough to go back. People start to get used to it. We've seen it in poor communities where you have people that go on government assistance. Government assistance is not designed properly. I believe it was Reagan who said, we view success in welfare by how many people we can take off of it, and that's always been kind of a conservative tenet when it comes to welfare. Yes, if we're going to have these social programs, so be it, but let's try to work it to where people are weaning from it, where people are starting to be more self-reliant and working for themselves and supporting themselves. Problem is when you start inserting this, I used an analogy in an article yesterday. Basically, if you got Sally sitting there working hard here a few months from now, she looks over at her brother Bob down the block, and Bob's sitting at home playing Call of Duty because he's still getting government assistance, which this will persist. Keep in mind, this isn't something that's going to just go away. Oh, great, we get a check from the bailout and all is done. This is going to persist. So keeping people at home, as California's doing, New York, more states, more cities, more areas doing the shutdown, this is going to force people into a dependency with government. What are we going to do? Are we going to not take the money? Are we going to let our families starve? Absolutely not. So we have to do something. Government's the only gig in town as a result of this, and so we're going to take it. The question is, are we going to let it go? And this is why we have to get people understanding this and educated on this concept, because if they go in, and there's a very good chance that people who never would have accepted government assistance in the past could be stuck with it going forward, and that's not a good thing. It might sound like a good thing to people now, might sound like a great thing to Democrats and leftists now, but in the long run, this is going to do dramatic harm to America.
Yeah. Well, in the interesting thing about this whole thing with dealing with this bailout is that, in the beginning, I was thinking, okay, so the state governments are coming in, like here in California. Gavin Newsom comes in, shuts down everything. I feel like if you're going to make that decision, you as the government need to have a solution to, hey, these companies can't work because you made a decision. So from that specific side, maybe that's a little pragmatic or not, but it's like you owe those businesses for essentially shutting them down.
Right.
Essentially, the problem is that it's not the state of California that is going to be providing support to these businesses and the people that are getting let go of work. It's the federal government. And then it's a blanket thing across the country in states that aren't even necessarily having a shutdown or aren't having as extreme of a shutdown as we are out here in California. So now you start getting big federal government involved in trying to deal with the repercussions of the local state governments. And I feel like that's an interesting dynamic here where, again, we're promoting big government solutions to local government decisions. And that's a weird kind of dichotomy right there.
Oh, it is. It's, they say that if you're going to push for limited government federalism, that you should oppose anything that comes from the quote unquote top. I like to call them the bottom in DC, and work your way up to the individual at the top of the hierarchy. But most people still say, the federal government's at top. If you start, if you're really going to push for limited government, you need to be as self-sufficient as possible at the lowest possible level. In other words, anything that the individual can handle, let the individual handle. Anything that should be decided upon by the community, they should get it onward and like I said, downward from there, in my opinion, where it's, if the community can't handle it, then it goes to the city, then it goes to the county, then it goes to the state, and the federal government is the last resort. I would have loved to see some variation of a cooperative bailout that was focused on the states, states and cities as the primary, the tip of the spear, where the federal government comes out and just says, look, we're here to catch the rest. We're the safety net. We're the one at the very bottom. You guys take care of your people. Do what you can. You've got the proximity. You have the boots on the ground. You know what's happening at this factory, that restaurant, this neighborhood, that neighborhood. For us to have this big, huge bailout from up top doesn't make very much sense. Having it available may have made sense. In other words, making it to where, look, we have these funds, and these funds should be distributed to the people that need it the most. And these funds should be made available to the businesses that are most vulnerable. But these decisions need to be made at the lower levels, or, like I said, higher levels. It needs to be made by the cities, by the states. They need to go through, assess what they need, and then come to us, and we can assist if we're needed. If we're not needed, if things are going great in West Virginia, then West Virginia can say, look, we don't need anything. Thanks, guys. We'll call you if we do. We got this covered. Great. California, Gavin Newsom says, oh, my gosh, it's pandemonium here. I've got everybody on lockdown, and now the governor's mansion is on fire. Okay, send in the National Guard, and everything in between, versus saying this is what we're going to do. This is what we decree. Blanket this across the nation, and this one solution will solve everybody's problem. That's wrong. It needs to be done at a more understanding level, and that's at the local level. They know that the communities know what they need. They know what the federal government needs to help them with, and they know that maybe it's not money. Maybe we're doing great. We're keeping everybody pretty much safe here. What we could really use is this or that, or the supply chain is down. We have no toilet paper. Please send toilet paper. Pull the government reserves on toilet paper and get it out to us, and then everything else we're fine. Or this community might need more medicine, more ventilators, more tests, more cash. Maybe it does come down to, look, our people are starving. We've had businesses shut down, can't go back to work. This is a community that's based very much on this one particular factory or this group of factories, and they're hurting. We can't do anything about it. Help to bail out this company or this factory. Help to get the people paid today, and then we'll be set from there. Versus what we're seeing, which is, okay, so what's the average that's going to be help these hundreds of millions of Americans? This is what we're going to send to everybody, and it's going to be universal, and it doesn't matter if this can only pay for so much in San Francisco, but here in Arkansas it'll pay for this. No, we're just doing this whole thing wrong, and it's a reaction. The last thing you want to be is a politician in the middle of a crisis who's being seen as doing nothing. And so what's happening? We've got a bunch of politicians in a crisis that are perceived doing as much as they can, which is in many cases the wrong direction to go.
Yeah, well, and I think kind of just going off of that as well, we've seen this problem before in a lot of different scenarios where. And the problem isn't just limited to Democrats, because a lot of times conservatives will just try to blame the Democrats and act like they're the problem, not the Republicans. It's both parties, and I think that we see this with this bailout that's going on right now. It's both parties pushing it. It's just it's a bad solution versus a worse solution, and we see that with the debate over like the minimum wage that they want to have across the country. And it's like, it's really easy for people in California, where we have such a high density of people all crammed together in a city, thinking $15 minimum wage, not that much. But if you go to like Texas or Louisiana or whatever it is, that's quite a bit of money compared to out here for what it can buy. And so that I think is one of the reasons why we do need to be making that argument for, let's get the power out of the federal government and back to the states, which is the constitutional way of doing things to begin with. And that's what's missing even in the Republican Party, I believe.
Oh, absolutely. We made a push back in 2016, 2017 for the Federalist Party, specifically because I wasn't happy with what the GOP was doing. I wasn't happy with the direction. It is true that they often, many of them, we won't say all of them, because there are a lot of federalism-minded Republicans in office today, and there's a lot more limited government voters out there as well. So I'm not going to blanket the Republican Party as this, because you can, let's face it, you can blanket the Democratic Party. I mean, I've never met a Democrat, at least in the last decade, who agrees with the tenets of limited government and self-reliance, and not having everything decreed from on high at the federal level. So, yes, we did see a need to break away from a lot of the Republicans. Things have changed. I do consider myself to be an independent conservative that almost always will vote Republican when it comes down to it. But there's a lot of Republicans I wouldn't support. We need that to be, there is no party that truly embraces this concept of, dividing the powers, layer cake federalism, making sure that you start with the smallest level of government to make as many decisions as possible. It should be I don't know how much football you watch, but I mean, you have quarterback drops back, they have their primary receiver going out on a route, or the primary route for that particular play, and they go through their progressions. It's like, okay, covered, open over there. So they go to their fourth. Well, that fourth option, that the dump off pass to the running back, that needs to be the federal government. That should be the absolute last. If nobody else can make the play, then you go to your dump off pass, and that's the federal government. Today, with almost everything, it's federal government first, and that's terrible. I'm not just talking about from a ideological constitutional perspective. The Constitution says this, and so that's true too. But it's terrible because it doesn't make any sense. Like you said, with minimum wage, that it makes no sense to try to make decisions at the national level when you have a country that's so diverse, both economically, culturally, everything. Education, the entire Department of Education is a joke, because how can you set standards when you have different communities that have different educational needs, different educational goals? Trying to push, let's say, just as an example, having classes regarding agriculture, that makes sense in Nebraska. That doesn't make sense in Brooklyn. So, so let's localize as much as possible. This coronavirus, I believe, is going to expose the dangers of basically the primacy of the federal government. And that's not an attack on Trump. That's not an attack on Capitol Hill. Democrats, Republicans. I think everybody are trying. Maybe not Nancy Pelosi, maybe not Chuck Schumer. I think they're still playing politics. But for the most part, most on Capitol Hill are like, look, guys, whatever, let's figure this out. But that's also a problem when you have a society that was built around the idea of localization, and yet over the last several decades, it has leaned more towards centralization of control and power and decision making, and that just shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, no, and I think that part of the problem too is that in all reality, there's not a whole lot of like local news anymore as well. So most people are watching, like national news, or they're reading, websites that are dealing with like the federal level and politics and things like that. And so nobody knows who's running in their local mayoral, race. They don't know who's running for their local congressman, or they just know senators, maybe House representatives in D.C., and then they know the president, and that's kind of it. And I'm kind of thinking that that's part of what's contributing to this happening both on the left and the right, is that everybody's just putting all their eggs in one basket on the federal level, as opposed to dealing with the local level. But at the same time, a lot of the people that are on the left and that are more progressive, they are focusing on the local level. But for some, in the sense of getting people elected. We see that up in like Minnesota. They're totally taking over that part of the country and that sort of thing. But I think as conservatives that should be valuing the local government, we need to take our eggs out of the basket for the federal level and then bring it back more local. Keep up on what's going on, like that. That's what's supposed to be directly impacting you the most. But because the Fed is taking over, that's what's directly impacting us now.
Right. And it's not just, you touched on something very important there. It's not just that the Fed's taking over. It's that the people are looking to the federal government. This is, like you said, the people don't know. I was in, when my son's been sick, and my youngest son, and we've had 3 open heart surgeries in the last 3 years. And so I've had to spend a lot of time in East Hollywood, which is not always a very fun place to be. Good food, great food, I'll admit, but there are some challenges there. As I was going through, spent a total of a little over 3 months there, and sometimes I would just get the pulse. It's in my DNA to try to get a feel for where people are spiritually, where they are politically, and I was shocked at how many people didn't even know who Adam Schiff was. Adam Schiff is their. This is his district, and this was in the middle of, at least at one point, it was in the middle of the impeachment debacle, and for him not to be known by his own district, that's crazy, and that's at a national level. Everybody knows who Trump is. Everybody knows who I shouldn't say everybody knows who Pence is. They might not, but then when I started talking about other things, the local representation there, it was terribly lacking. And this is more directed, I know you're aware, but more directed at the audience. Think to yourself, who did you vote for as your state representative, state senate, depending on where you are, just state legislature in general. Who is your mayor? Who's on your city council if you're in a city that has a city council? These are questions that we need to answer. We need to know the answer to. Because here's the thing, and this is what has always confused me about the push for the federal government being the primary focus. The people that directly influence your life, our lives as individuals, are almost always going to be people that are at the local level. The decisions that are made by city councils, by state legislators, by governors and mayors, and at the county level, everybody. These are the ones that will impact your life the most, much more than anything President Trump does, or President Obama, or the Senate, or the Congress, or even the Supreme Court in many cases. What happens locally is what that's where all the direct effects on your lives are. Now, conversely, those people at the local level, these local representatives, they are also more directly affected by you. Your vote counts more towards, a mayor in a mid-sized city towards that election than it will ever count towards a president or a senator. Your vote for a city council person is going to have a lot more impact because there's just fewer people voting. If you're in an area where there's 10,000 people that are voting generally in an election, then your vote counts as one out of 10,000. Whereas if you're trying to be a vote for the presidential election here in California with 40 million people, and with about 17 million of them voting, then that's 1 out of 17 million in a state that is almost never going to vote for a Republican for president, since Reagan. So, you don't have that power. You don't have that influence. Local politics influences you more, and you influence local politics more. This is not an opinion. Anyone who understands this stuff will agree with this, and that's why it befuddles me that people don't pay attention. They aren't putting their understanding and research and learning about what's happening. Parents that send their kids to public school, how could you not know not only the names of, but the perspectives of everybody that's sitting on the school board? It blows me away that this is the case. America needs this I guess you could say, revival of federalism, of understanding what's happening at the local level, and of participating in localized government. That doesn't necessarily mean running for office, though that would be nice, but it does mean getting involved, making your voice heard, getting off of the national chat boards and tweeting at President Trump. Instead of doing that, focus on your local area. Make changes that will actually affect you and your family. That can be done locally.
Yeah. And one of the other aspects, too, is that it seems as if the Democrats and the left, in general, have a lot more active involvement in local communities and in politics and in activism and things like that. Whereas I think in general, at least from what I'm seeing out here in California, in general, you don't see the same level of activism among conservatives. And I find that interesting as well. I know I know I have some friends that are in the Midwest and the South, and there's more activism out there when it comes to the conservative side, but there's not a whole lot of voices. Even though when you think there's millions of conservatives that are here in California, we're just outnumbered, but it's still there's not a whole lot of people that get involved. Maybe they're just giving up and feel like they can't actually accomplish anything. I don't know.
I think that's definitely something because. Like you said, I'm from Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, activism was a conservative thing. So, of course you had the leftists that were doing their thing, but for the most part, the organizations, the community involvement, it really was a conservative thing. I think what you identified is, it seems the majority has not only the lion's share of government control, but also activism. It's something that I've never looked into. So everything that I'm telling you is anecdotal, but that's something that maybe there's an opening there. Perhaps it is time to really push for conservatism. For conservatives to be more directly involved with what's happening in their local community versus just a blanket statement of, hey, whatever you do, focus on your local government, building up the momentum for local activism from conservatives, whether they're in friendly waters in Oklahoma or unfriendly waters in California. That's something to strongly consider. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's one of the things that you and I have been kind of talking about to a certain degree is how do we get more people involved in dealing with conservatism and understanding it as well? Because I think that one of the things that we need to figure out is how do we get people away from thinking Republican Democrat? Because in all reality, both sides a lot of times are in the wrong. But if we start thinking in terms of liberal versus conservative, and start looking at the divide that way, as opposed to just picking a political party team, and I think that that's something that you and I have been discussing and trying to figure out, like what's the best way to move forward from that perspective as well.
Yes, you'll never hear me say liberal, and this is going to probably the wrong time, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. I think it was Prager. It was either Prager, you, or somebody did a great. Actually, now that I think about it, I'm almost positive it was Dennis Prager himself who did a video about how he's a liberal but not a leftist, or he the differentiation there. I know that in our public discourse that liberalism and leftism have become synonymous. I have a writer over at Rucker Report who believes that it's a war on language. He's written probably, 50 articles specifically about defining the difference between liberalism and leftism. Even he's very much against the use of the word gun control. He likes to call it liberty control. It's great. I'm not laughing at him or the concept. I'm laughing at the fact that he's right. I just wanted to throw that out there because liberalism really is about liberty. True liberalism is about, Dave Rubin is a liberal. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, I think, are liberals without being leftists. And there's a lot of leftists that are very, very, very far from being liberal. And I would say the majority of people who are making decisions, at least in D.C., in the Democratic Party, are more leftists than anything else. If there were more liberals, we'd be in better shape. But anyway, so back to your original premise. Should we be more focused, less on parties, more on ideologies? Absolutely. I'm a firm believer that the majority of Americans are conservative. Many of them just don't know it. Many of them have attached the concept of conservatism with the name Republican. And because for whatever reason they grew up Democrats, they live in areas or they belong to a demographic, a racial group, or whatever that says you're supposed to be a Democrat because of this or that or the other. Therefore, you're not a Republican. Therefore, you're not a conservative. I believe most people are. I believe that if you were to take and educate people on the tenets of conservatism and compare them, I'm not saying hide progressivism or leftism or whatever you want to call it. I'm not saying you don't talk about that. Please talk about it. Let's put idea versus idea. Let's take ideology against ideology, philosophy versus philosophy, and let's lay it out fairly. And if you do that, if you ask people, do you believe in more freedom or less freedom? Do you think that we need to have our morality mandated based upon a small subset of the population and in an attempt to not offend anybody ever? Do you believe in social justice, and do you even know what social justice is? Do you believe that you would be better off giving more of your money to the government so that they can then distribute it how they see fit, or do you trust yourself to be able to take your money and live your life more appropriately with if your taxes were lowered? Across the board, even if we look at the more polarizing concepts, such as the Second Amendment, if we take the statistics, I'm not talking about, looking at, by golly, I've got the Constitution and so I need my minigun and my rocket launcher. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, let's look at the facts. Let's look at areas where more people have guns legally. Let's compare those to areas where there are more gun restrictions. Where's their crime? Where does the crime spike? Now, think about it from a perspective of if you have a gun and, what is the most likely way that you're able to, quote unquote, defend yourself in a bad situation, by having a firearm to defend your family, or by waiting 17 minutes for the police to come, or even 7 minutes, or even 2 minutes. I think the shooting, I believe, is in Dayton. 27 seconds, the gunman was able to get off and kill several people, even with the police literally standing right there and taking him down very quickly. Same thing with abortion. We can have that discussion about women's rights versus human rights. We can have a discussion about whether or not the baby is viable or has a heartbeat or has feelings or whatever. But if we were to take the facts, the actual science behind it, and apply that to people, and then take the cultural and religious aspects of it and get that into the minds of people, I do believe, again, that the majority, I would say it's closer to 70%, some people think I'm crazy, but I would say the majority of Americans are actually conservative. They've just been brainwashed. A lot of us have been. A lot of us have been shown the wrong idea, and there's a stigma surrounding the Republican Party that makes it impossible for certain conservatives to even realize they're conservatives, let alone be a Republican.
Yeah, well, and I think you probably are pretty close to your estimate of people who would be conservatives if they were dealing with the reality. Because I think one example of that, it would be like personal property rights. Is, like you've got a lot of people that supporting people like AOC and Bernie Sanders, but if you were to go up to them and say, we're going to take away your money and give it to somebody else, and just literally just come up and take it away and give it to somebody, they'd be like, no, that's mine. Like when it's dealing with themselves, they're able to process it, but when it's dealing with somebody else's money, all of a sudden there's this disconnect. And I think if we can kind of frame the discussion in that way and really deal with the facts, make it personalized to a certain degree, and actually walk people through logically, as opposed to it just being, hey, I'm MAGA, pro NRA, and X, Y, and Z, and that's your argument. You're never gonna win over the people on the other side. You got to deal with reality. You got to deal with facts. You got to deal with logic. You got to deal with that kind of stuff. And for whatever reason, we're not seeing a ton of that right now in pushing conservative values. That's something that I think that we need more of right now.
Absolutely. We need a movement that educates people on what conservatism is and why it's beneficial. I would say that the majority of organizations out there, conservative organizations, have, no offense, but they've dropped the ball. They have gone off and I'm not saying generally, there's good and bad in everything. I think that the good has not outweighed the bad nearly as much as it should and nearly as much as it used to. And I'm not going to name organizations, but I think that there's a gaping hole right now in establishing what conservatism is and in educating the people. Guys, keep something very, very important in mind. The reason that people ask me why I believe that conservatism is more in the people's hearts than a lot of them realize, and it's not just anecdotal. The reason that I believe this is because if you look at what's pushing progressivism, the industries, the cards are stacked so hard against us for the fact that there are so many conservatives, self-proclaimed conservatives out there, when you have an education system that is, we're talking about 90% of teachers and professors that at least lean left, if not are, go all the way far to the left. And with the majority, anybody who's been on a college campus at all realizes that as of today, if you are a conservative, you're stifled. If you have, if you don't support safe spaces and selective diversity and, like I said, quote unquote, women's rights, if you have anything other than a very, at least extreme, if not radical view of a progressive mindset, then you have to survive college today. You have to kind of make it through and hope that you're not completely lambasted by professors, let alone other students. You look at Hollywood. You look at the leftism there. It's rampant. I mean, you want to lose a job in Hollywood, come out as a conservative. Suddenly you're going to be on Twitter, and that's your only venue. And then of course the media. So when we look at the three big, I guess you could say, influencers, outside influencers of people's thoughts, the education system, Hollywood, and mainstream media, we're talking far to the left of center. We're talking about at least 70-80% of those who are participating are doing so with the intention of making other people progressive. So the sheer fact that they don't have a domination tells me we're right. They're fighting against the truth. We have the truth on our side. Let's use that. Let's build a movement that's going to focus on getting the truth out there, on propagating reality, on making sure that facts are understood, not manipulated, and let's look at what's actually going to fix this country, the problems. We've seen a good chunk of it. I mean, let's face it, the tax cuts helped the economy so much that should have been a humongous wake-up call. Unfortunately, mainstream media, education system, Hollywood really went after the tax cuts before they were fully fleshed out, I guess you could say, before the benefits were out there to the people. And so we had a 2018 midterm election that was disastrous. I know, but we kept the Senate and we didn't lose a ton of seats in the House. No, it was disastrous. It was absolutely, utterly disastrous because we should have won that. The Republicans, and when I say we, Republicans should have won that hands down. There shouldn't have even been a question. There was nothing controversial out there. Obamacare repeal was already dead at that point. The economy was soaring. Tax cuts were in. Things were looking great. Why did the Republicans lose control of the House at all? They shouldn't have. So it was a disaster, and you can blame the leftist media and education system and all that other stuff. That can't happen again in 2020. And I'm not going to get partisan and say, go vote Republican, straight ticket. But I will say this, we do need a conservative revival. And that has to come from the people, from the grassroots, not from politicians. So
yeah, and that's something that you and I have been trying to figure out. Like, okay, so how are we going to move forward with that? And that's been one of my things, especially ever since starting the GK, has been in the back of my mind is, okay, so there's a problem. If there's a problem, somebody needs a solution. If nobody's coming up with a solution, it's like, why not us? Why not me? And that's kind of been my MO with running with the GK. I mean, that's why, we've got a bunch of young guys that are podcasting. It's why we're coming out with our publishing company and putting out books and content. And we did our first online conference last month. I'm just like, hey, what's stopping us? So, you give a little bit of a teaser on some of the stuff we've been talking about as we're still kind of working through a lot of this kind of stuff.
First, you didn't tell me there was only young guys that were podcasting when you invited me. I'm old. I'm in my 20s. Teaser. For the last, I would say, year or so, there's been a need for this concept of an American conservative movement. The question that has been percolating in my head, as I talk about it, as I go out there and push for it, the question has been, what exactly is that? What is needed? What is the American conservative movement? It's kind of like I hate to invoke the Bible, but it's kind of like somebody told me to build an ark, but they didn't tell me how to build it or to get the gopher wood or anything like that. So I really had no idea. I just knew that we needed to build this. And then I started talking to you. And then all of a sudden, it starts heading into 45 different directions. And in a good way. That's usually a bad thing. But I think that over the last week or so, we've been blessed with some really strong information, really strong direction. So as a teaser, I would say we've talked about the need for conservatism to come out. We've talked about the need for the people to be alerted to what's out there. And we've also talked about the coronavirus. What does the coronavirus represent? Right now, it represents a grave danger, not just the disease itself. I think that's the least of our worries. Getting the coronavirus doesn't seem to be this tremendous world-stopping event. Yes, it's a pandemic. Yes, it's dangerous. But is it enough to essentially cancel our future? But that's what the government is doing. They're attempting to cancel our future to keep us preserved for today, and preserved for not very good reasons. So what needs to be done? We need to prevent people from falling into the trap that this is setting, the trap of reliance on government, of dependency on government, not just at the individual level, but at the business level. And so that was the predicate that never existed before last week, at least in my mind, never existed as a reasoning behind why we would even consider forming a new conservative movement. Now that predication is out, and things are starting to become clear, not just in ideology, but also in direction. What do we want to do? How do we do it? Those things have been falling into our lap. I don't want to go into great detail yet, not because I'm being aloof, but because the details are flying at us from different directions and every single day. we're getting ideas and talking to people that are, nothing short of an absolute blessing. It's I'll share a quick story. Don't want to make it too cheesy, but there have been things, and I've shared them with Jeff. There have been things that have happened the last few days that have been exciting because they couldn't have happened as a result of anything short of some sort of help, I guess you could say, intervention, so to speak. And that's exciting when you're trying to build something that's going to really help Americans, and I truly believe this will, and potentially even help the world. Getting that affirmation from a outside source is wonderful. The people that are revealing themselves to us, the ideas that are flying at us, nothing short of miraculous. And I can barely contain my excitement as to what can come in the very near future. So,
yeah,
I want to go. Can we wrap this up? I need.
Yeah. We'll see. Like I feel like it's one of those things when we're looking at true conservatism. Again, there's a lot of people that say they're conservative, and there's a lot of people that they'll pick up the mantle and say, hey, we're conservative, we're going to be this movement. But that usually turns into some sort of like partisan, like right now we see that a lot with, Trump supporters, right? And it's not to throw anybody under the bus by any means, but being a Trump supporter is not necessarily being the same thing as being a conservative. And I think that one of the dangers that we need to combat with creating an actual conservative movement is getting away from the celebrity mentality of I associate with that person, and so whatever that person says I believe, and actually have people that are principled and actually understand what it is that they believe, what it is that they're standing for, and what it is that they're voting for. And I think that that's why having something in place where we're creating a grassroots movement, where we're actually getting information in people's hands, is going to be so vitally important to, in all reality, the future of our country. And I think that that's why something like this is so important right now.
Absolutely. We need that we need to replace the herd mentality. It has benefited us, let's face it. It has benefited us from a Donald Trump perspective in a lot of ways, because it has brought people to the voting booth that weren't there before. That was 2016. Will it work in 2020? We'll see. I think it will, but perhaps not. But here's the thing. That herd mentality does not solve real problems. That only gets certain people elected. And the same herd mentality can get the wrong people elected in the future. So we can't rely on, this person has the most rallies. That person is I like what this guy has to say, so whatever he says goes. Or that girl that I respect, she says that I should be voting for this person, so I will. That type of that's so un-American. It's not even funny. Okay, how do Americans make decisions? They get the information, and they make the decision based upon what's in their heart and what's in their best interest and what's in the best interest of their family and their community. At least that's how it should be. It shouldn't be a matter of, man, look at Bernie. This guy's great. He gets these huge crowds and he talks about free college and, surely he's right. Surely he can pay for a $93 trillion Green New Deal, because if he couldn't, why would so many thousands of people go to his rallies? Why would he be so popular, and why does he have so many Bernie bros, and why does he trend on Twitter all the time? No, we should, as Americans, we have freedom, and that freedom is not just a benefit, it's also a responsibility. We have the responsibility to know what it is that we're supporting, who we're supporting, what they're voting for, what are the policies, who are our local politicians, how does this bill affect us? Why are we being shut down because of the coronavirus? What is this bailout package? How is that going to ever get paid back? These are questions that need to be asked. And I'm not just talking about sending out a tweet. I'm talking about having knowledge. There needs to be a source of knowledge. And as much as, again, I don't want to rip on specific conservative groups, but I'll say this: memes don't educate people. memes don't win elections. It shocks me how much attention is paid to, a picture of a politician and a statistic next to them, and that statistic may or may not even be accurate, or a funny video with the president's head on some majestic hero's body going through and slaying CNN and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and these things. Okay, they're adorable. They're funny. They're sometimes offensive, but it's overkill. What happened to arming ourselves with knowledge? What happened to arming ourselves with the truth? That has to be put first, instead of this whole, like I said, herd mentality of as you were saying, the MAGA crowd. I support President Trump. I do not own a Make America Great Again hat. I support President Trump, and if he starts to push authoritarian concepts, I will speak out against those concepts. I support President Trump, and if he starts to push for a gun ban, as he was thinking about, back in less than a year ago, July-ish of 2019, talking about red flag gun laws and universal background checks and certain types of gun bans. I'll speak out against those. So we as Americans must have that type of mentality, the mentality that we have our ideology that's not based upon what this person says or what this person says, but that's based upon what we gather from knowledge, what's out there and what we feel here and up here. That's how people should vote. That's how they should act. And if more Americans did that, then I think that we could run as even more efficiently than we do today. And I think we would even be in better shape handling something like the coronavirus than we have been.
Yeah, and an example that I wanted to throw out there about this herd mentality, and it's going to be a stupid example, but still an example, is Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel would always do a man on the street type interview show, like segment on his show. And he would go out, and I believe it was during the last election cycle when it was Trump versus Hillary. And he'd go out and ask for people's response to quotes from either Trump or Hillary. But then he would swap the names. And then people would respond, but they would be responding to the person, not necessarily what was saying. So they would justify, if they were a Hillary supporter and he was giving them a quote that he said was from Hillary, even though it was from Trump, they would be like hardcore support it, whatever it is. It's like, oh, that was actually from President Trump. And then they'd be shocked. And I think that that's part of the problem that we're seeing in our country right now, is that, Democrats 15 years ago, the very same people that are criticizing Trump so much, 15, 20 years ago, they were saying the exact same thing that he's saying now. But all of a sudden now, it's racist, bigoted, hateful, considered hate speech, all this kind of stuff. And I think that that's why we need to get away from the personalities a little bit and stick with the principles, and then call balls and strikes wherever that might be. Maybe Republicans are going to have, some better calls right now, because maybe they're like 50% good, hypothetically, right? Democrats are going to be mostly bad, I would say, right now. But that's general. But that's because I have certain principles, and you're looking at the situation, and then you put those principles, line them up, and then figure out who's right, who's wrong, who deserves my vote based on the principles, not, hey, he's a funny guy and he gets 20,000 people to show up to an arena.
Right. Absolutely. We have to, balls and strikes, that is the right way to call it. There are organizations out there that are trying to do this, but not enough of them. Mm-hmm. There are voices out there that are trying to sound reasoned, but not enough of them. One of the things that I see as extremely important within an American conservative movement is that we're encouraging and in many ways empowering people to be their at least their own personal thought leaders, if not developing thought leaders for the rest of the world, or for the rest of the nation, I should say. In other words, there are too many people, like you said, who focus on personalities. We need free thinkers, and I'm not talking about free thinkers as in like, I think a lot of times people will hear free thinker and they assume that means beatnik or some type of hipster or something, whatever. Now I'm talking about free thinkers as in take a situation, any situation, not be able to make the right calls based upon the quote, the circumstance, the policy, the ideology, regardless of who said it or which politician did this or which talking head supports that. We do latch on as a nation far too much onto individuals, and it's not just politicians. I remember there was something, I don't even remember what something Tucker Carlson had done or said that was really offensive in the past. I mean, something about like teen girls, I think, and and it ticks me off. But my gosh, I was suddenly the enemy to conservatives or to Tucker Carlson fans when I would even speak out about that or said anything negative about it. Look, I'm not saying Tucker Carlson is terrible or that I disagree with him. He just shouldn't have said that. Okay, I mean, it was true. He shouldn't talk about underage teen girls in a sexual manner. Period. I don't care. Don't justify it. You're ruining your perspective. You're ruining your reputation by saying no, that was taken out of context. No, it wasn't. I mean, even in context, it's much worse. Okay, well, you're just a liberal. No, I'm not. I just don't. I don't get chuckles about grown men talking about teenage girls. Okay, sorry, but that type of mentality has to change, and the only way to do that is to make people realize you have your opinions, you have your perspectives. They're valued. They're valuable. Don't let a mentality of following this person, that person, another person. Don't let that cloud your own internal judgment, because you can be embarrassed by Jimmy Kimmel in the future if you do. And there's nothing worse than having a shifting perspective based solely on which tribe you're in or which icon you follow. That's where the base is no longer valid.
Right. And so when we're looking at, okay, so we're gonna be, and we're still working out the details and figuring out what we want to do with this American conservative movement. But if people want to stay in the loop, know what's going on when we do come out with announcements and that sort of thing, I know right now people are submitting emails and their information because they want more information. We're getting a lot of response, but how can people do that might be watching this show?
So we're going to have, if you go to AmericanConservativeMovement.com, right now it redirects to my site, needing to do some proper technical support to get just the right site up. But right now it goes to Rucker Report, a page that allows people to learn a very little bit about it, but more importantly to be able to reach out to us, to request more information. We're going to start sending out emails again very soon. We're going to be putting out videos that tell more. And as we reach out, we've been reaching out to many people every day for the last few days, and we're going to continue to do that until we have what we believe to be the right team, the right. I keep telling people on Twitter, we're putting together a team of superheroes, conservative superheroes, and the response has been pretty good. So go to AmericanConservativeMovement.com. It'll take you to a page, one way or the other, that will allow you to reach out to us, to tell us your name, your address. I'm sorry, not your address, your email, and your phone number if you're comfortable with that. And as more information comes out as we launch, then we'll reach out to everybody.
Yeah, and I highly encourage people to do that because I think, especially now with what we're seeing with, and we were kind of touching on this earlier, but what we were seeing with government overreach with in response to the coronavirus has really sped up this process for us. And whether it's dealing with the bailouts, whether it's the DOJ's attempt to try to waive constitutional rights in a national emergency, we're seeing these government oversteps right now. And so I feel like right now the best way to arm ourselves is with knowledge, with information, and getting as many people as we can buying into the idea of true constitutional conservatism, because it works better than anything else. And I feel like that's why it's so vitally important that we get people to understand why this works which is why I think that that what we're putting together is gonna be really, really cool.
It should be very, very cool, and hopefully very, very effective. That's the important part.
Mm-hmm. For sure. So now, if people want to be following up with you, following what you're posting, what you're writing, that sort of thing, what's the best way for people to be doing that?
Oh, probably twitter.com/JD Rucker. They can go to NOQ Report, knockreport.com, and see mine and other people's writings. We are trying to get as many people to write for us as possible. So if you've ever needed a venue through which to express your conservative and or Christian views, we're open to it. Just give me a holler at Knock Report, and we'll get you set up.
Yeah, definitely. Highly encourage you guys to do that. And then for everybody else as well, make sure you guys are liking, subscribing, all the good stuff. I know JD's going to be coming out with another Rucker Report here in the decently near future. I really enjoyed his first episode. And then, and then we've also got a bunch more stuff, coming out. Make sure you guys check out our book, Social Injustice. You guys can go to socialinjusticebook.com. If you guys go over to gatekeepersonline.com/store, we've got that book for sale. We've also pre-ordering Pastor Sam Jones' book, 5 Steps to Kill a Nation. And if you guys use the code Jeff, you guys get 10% off anything over there in the store. But yeah, thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much, JD, for coming on. I really appreciate it. Always enjoy our talks and conversations and that sort of thing. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate you.
Of course. And then everybody else, we're going to be back tomorrow as well. Tomorrow, I'm just looking at the schedule because we're pumping out a bunch of shows. Tomorrow, we've got Bishop Robert E. Smith coming on the podcast. Friday, we've got Dustin Faulkner. Monday, we've got Judd Saul from the Enemies Within the Church documentary. We're going to be talking about that as well. And I've got a bunch more guests that we're lining up and confirming for next week as well. So stay tuned. Again, subscribe. Keep up on what's going on. Stay conservative. And we'll see you guys tomorrow.